This is the Porsche Macan, but there's been a shift at the top for 2022. There's no more Macan Turbo. Now the GTS tops the ranks and inherits the big engine. So no longer is the GTS the, quote, sweet spot. Now it's the apex. So let's see what it's like to drive. First, some housekeeping here. It's my duty to tell you that this is technically my second go here in this Macan GTS. The first go, the car acted a little bit weird, and it kind of acted a little bit weird from the jump. So it would start, and then it would start in metric, I would turn it off, and then it would be fine, and then it would start, and it would like say that the tire pressure was off, and I would turn it off, and it'd be fine, and then ultimately after like 2 days, it did throw an engine code at me. Now, Paulo checked the forums for me, and he said, okay, if you release the gas cap or open the gas cap and then close it up, the code will clear. This is like a known thing. And that did work. Came back to the car about 10 minutes later, and then the code was back. So ultimately we decided to send it in, get it diagnosed, and you know, all things being equal, this car was like super fresh. Like we were the first people to drive it, so maybe it was just a setup issue. But we've had it back, and we've spent a week with it, and it has given us no problems since. So let's talk about this Macan GTS. So as we said, this Macan GTS now inherits the top spot in the lineup, which means it gets the 2.9 liter twin turbocharged V6 that makes 434 horsepower and 405 pound-feet. If the VAG Group 2.9 TT V6 sounds familiar, it might be because it's very similar, almost the same engine as is under the hood of the Audi RS5 we've tested. Wherever the engine comes from, I'm just glad it's here. The tsunami of torque that's delivered from this 2.9 twin turbo V6, granted it doesn't start until 3,000 RPM, but once it does hit, you are just engulfed in a tsunami of torque, and it just throws you back into your seat. And then the cracks and the pops that you get on shifts from this PDK are just incredible. And since you have all-wheel traction and these Pirelli PZeros, you get to 60 in like 4 seconds, just under 4 seconds. And if you know me, I don't really care about 0 to 60 times, horsepower numbers. What I care about is the drama, and this feels special. This is our first press car from Porsche, which means it's the first time we've gotten to spend an extended period of time with the car. And I'll be honest, I went into the week excited, but generally not really understanding the Porsche cult. And let me tell you, after a few days in this GTS, I'm starting to get it. This is their entry-level SUV, and it manages to feel so sharp, so nimble, and so much more special than I could have ever thought. And this is a Porsche, and more importantly, it's a GTS model, so it's way more than engine, power, and 0 to 60. The dynamics on this Macan have reset my expectation and the benchmark to which I will now judge future performance SUVs. The handling characteristics that you get from this thing are not what you'll get from something like an X3M competition. They're not what you'll get from a GLC 63 AMG. And they're probably not what you'll get from the Stelvio QV, and Audi doesn't even have a dog in this fight. So there's so much sense of precision and connection here. The X3M is probably the next closest best thing, but even still, every time I head into a corner, in this thing, it just tells me that I can come in faster, I can dial in more steering, and that's because there's just so much front end, there's so much grip, the chassis is great, the steering feedback is phenomenal, and it's just good. It just is good. Of course, the dynamics is where you expect a Porsche vehicle to perform, especially one wearing green GTS letters. So how have they done it? Well, of course, it all starts with the MLB chassis. They've added bracing and rigidity built in, which allows the adaptive air suspension to do its job better. The dampers will soften and stiffen in accordance to whatever mode you're in, but they also change the rebound parameters to allow more or less travel, and since it's an air suspension, you have a greater degree of adjustability than a more traditional electronic damper. There's a double wishbone setup in the front, and a multi-link rear with the PASM, Porsche Active Suspension Management System, which means each individual wheel is being monitored and adapted in real time. There's also things like torque vectoring, an enhanced steering rack, and the 6-piston brakes up front, and super grippy Pirelli PZero Corsa tires on all 4 corners. And without sounding like a broken record, this is the best handling SUV that I've ever driven, and would certainly put to shame a lot of mid-tier sports cars that we've tested here on the channel. But in fairness, every now and then, you're not on a racetrack, and you're not on a country road going 10/10ths. So what is this thing like to drive like a normal human being? We've tested a lot of high-performance versions of regular cars, and they almost always feel like they've gone too far and ruined the daily livable nature of the car. But there are two very clear exceptions. One is the 2022 Audi S8 we drove the other day, love that thing, and two is this Macan. I'm really surprised at how the Macan settles down when not in sport mode. The air suspension softens back really, really well. You still will get some thuds over some medium and larger road imperfections, but it's 21-inch wheels. I mean, come on, that's unavoidable with physics and just the construction of the wheel. And of course, the steering lightens up, but it never really loses the feedback that you want, especially from that front end. And then the PDK, it slows down and it smooths itself out a little bit. And then the engine and the exhaust, they also quiet down. You do have a valved exhaust, so you can have it in loud or quiet mode. And at that point, it just feels like a normal car. The visibility is great, the cabin's quiet, and I have loads and loads of headroom, so I never really feel claustrophobic, and that's even without a sunroof. So by all accounts, this Macan GTS is one of, if not the most complete sports SUVs we've ever driven here on Downshift. One of the most adept sports cars out there, while also being a comfortable and practical SUV package. And it looks pretty good too. All right. So, the Macan GTS. Now, I've always thought that this is a very handsome little SUV, and for 2022 here it gets a bit of a facelift, and you're seeing that from all of the images that you've seen already for this video. But actually for 2024 I believe it's actually getting an entirely new generation, so we'll have this nice handsome facelift for 2 years and then we'll go into a new Macan. But I do want to cover a couple things that we didn't talk about behind the wheel. Specifically, this is equipped with, of course, the Sport Chrono package, and what you get is sport response. There's a little button inside your drive mode selector on your steering wheel there, and you push that and you get 20 seconds of just absolute craziness. Think of it as like a push to pass, a DRS, an overboost. It basically just turns things up a notch for 20 seconds, so you can apparently drive really, really fast. Another couple things that I thought was interesting, this thing weighs about 4,400 pounds. Not too heavy, it's not too light, but interestingly enough, the towing capacity is also about 4,400 pounds, and that's really interesting to me because we were just in the X5M competition from BMW, so that would be a class bigger, like a Cayenne fighter, and that thing had a towing capacity of under a ton, under 2,000 pounds. So this thing, to bring over 2 tons, 4,000 pounds, that's pretty impressive. Also, fuel economy is about 19 mpg combined, if you care about that sort of thing. But let's talk about the way that this thing looks. Now, like we said, this being the facelift, you get an entirely revised front grille. Now, this blacked out, or I guess dark gray, black, whatever it is, it's specific to the GTS. So as we said, the GTS is now taking the place of the Turbo at the top of the range. Of course, also have your 4-pointed Porsche headlights. You've got a lot of detail inside the headlight. It's really cool, the little attention to detail. You've got kind of like a lattice pattern down here. Of course, your front splitter, and then some pretty simple hood lines. I like the hood that comes up and it's got kind of the clamshell thing over the headlights, so you've got those little holes there. Just kind of a cool design. Oh my God, those are squirrels and they're gonna attack me. Are we gonna have beef? Porsche's gonna be mad if you attack their car. Anyway, squirrels aside, what we have here is 21-inch wheels. They're a nice satin black finish. They're really handsome wheels. You've got 6 piston brakes back there. They are steels. They're not the carbon ceramic, but that's okay. And then they're wrapped in Pirelli PZero Corsa tires, I believe. And these things have just so much grip. We talked about it behind the wheel. There is just so much more that the front end can give on this car than you're expecting. You can always dial in just a little bit more steering. You can always take that corner just a little bit faster. So the limit of this car is higher than you think it is, which is just really rewarding behind the wheel. This thing, at its core, with the GTS, is such a good handler. Now, of course, down the side in the profile here, it's pretty simple. I do like the white paint that we have here. We have no sunroof, keep weight down, keep things rigid. Black door treatments, black wing mirror. We do have a black side blade specific to the GTS with the green GTS, which is mirrored on the interior, which we'll get to in a minute here. But it is a smaller SUV. This is a bit smaller than the X5 or the X3. It's a bit smaller than the GLC. It's probably on par with something like a Stelvio, but it's just really nice design. Coming back here, you've got a black rear wing up top, and then you've got a hidden trunk release in your wiper. I swear to God, it took me like a day to figure out where the trunk release was back here. But it's a nice design. It keeps things really clean back here. Full width LED tail bar. Porsche, of course, Macan GTS. And then you've got this black diffuser down here, really aggressive. Again, kind of mirrored detail in that stamping from that front grille. And then, of course, you've got quad tips out back. So really, really attractive SUV. But let's step inside because it gets better in there. Okay, then in the cabin of the Macan GTS, there's one word that I think best describes the interior, if I could sum it up in one word, and that's special. And it starts with the way that you even turn the car on. Every car now has push button start. That's not really cool or interesting anymore. I remember back when I was in high school and middle school, you know, like Wiz Khalifa would come out with songs like "My Car Don't Got No Key." Everything has it now. But the Porsche experience is different because it starts with the way that you turn the car on. The place that you would put the key historically is on the left of the steering wheel, and granted you don't need to have the key now, there's actual fob here, so it'll read the key fob in your pocket, but you actually turn the thing on the left of the steering wheel. And it's reminiscent of, you know, this started back in the Le Mans racing days. The drivers had to, you know, when the gun went off, they would run to their car, jump in, and then strap in, turn the car on, and it was faster by like a fraction of a second to have the key on the left of the wheel. So that's why they do it. So it's that little bit of history that they incorporate into the car, which I think is just cool. And then from there, the design unfolds around you. I mean, there's just an amazing attention to detail in here. All of the materials are super high end. You've got this really supple, soft leather on your top of your door card, all the way across your dash. Your seats are, you know, really rich leather, and then of course they're toned with this Alcantara, or what Porsche calls race tex. I believe it's synthetic. So, you know, that's really, really nice. And then of course you've got carbon fiber everywhere. It's lacquered, it's got aluminums, and then the steering wheel itself is wrapped in race tex, and everything, by the way, if you haven't been seeing it from the images, is stitched in green to match that outside side card. So it's on top of your door panel, it's on top of your dash, it's on the inside of your steering wheel, on the seats, on the headrest, you've got green seat belts. It just feels unique. And then the steering wheel itself, you know, it's wrapped in the race tex, it's got the carbon fiber, but it also is from the 911, it's got the kind of like holes through it, you know, to give you that sense of like lightweight race car because it's the GTS, and then you've got these aluminum shift paddles, which are really satisfying to use. And of course you've got your drive mode and your sport response and that sort of thing here, but it just feels special and different and unique. From there though, we start to talk about the technology, and as a driver's car, you don't usually want a whole lot of technology, but seeing as this is an SUV, there's a couple things that I think are missing on here that maybe I would like to see. There is no head-up display on this GTS, which I think is a little bit odd. You have a semi-digital gauge cluster, but you know, it's the gauge layout makes sense. It's really readable. The right-hand side pod, there's three, so the right-hand side pod is the thing that you can totally customize with your torque split and your consumption and your navigation and that sort of thing. And then you've got this 10.9-inch head unit, which is fine, it's decent. It doesn't have a 360 camera, and the camera that it does have isn't the highest resolution. It's fine, it's definitely usable and passable, but it's just, I think the new generation will fix a couple of these things. Of course, you get Apple CarPlay, Android Auto, and that sort of stuff. But then in terms of like your driver assistance suite, you know, we always talk about this in the technology portion. You have a button here, you know, that's supposedly your lane keeping assist, or you have blind spot monitoring, you have cruise and all that sort of thing, but it doesn't, like, you don't have nearly as robust a system as, you know, even some of the Fords that we drive recently, you know, the Blue Cruise or, you know, anything like that. So even the Hyundai system, the highway driving assist system, it's not here, you know, and that's because I think Porsche is allocating a lot of their resources and engineering and R&D budgets to making the car drive really well rather than, you know, a bunch of frilly technology features. But then speaking of the technology, down here in your center console is really the only area of the car that I don't like, and that's because everything is a haptic feedback button, which means everything is trimmed in gloss black. It's just a big sheet of gloss black. So, you know, we're shooting this in July, August, where, you know, we're sweaty, humid, you know, we're touching these buttons, and then it just gets real mucky. So have a microfiber in here for to clean things up. But then, you know, your storage is okay. You've got a little space for your phone. You've got dual cup holders. You've got center console with a wireless charger and 2 USB-Cs. It's pretty small, but it works. Of course, you got glove box and door cards with some storage in there as well. But then in terms of the actual comfort of the cabin, it's really, really nice. I have a huge amount of headroom. Don't have a sunroof, but I really don't necessarily feel like I need it, at least not in the front. In the back, it does get to be a little dark, and we'll talk about that in a minute, but I have a huge amount of headroom. It feels really comfortable. The seats are really, really nice. They kind of hug me a little bit in my lower section, but I have plenty of room for my shoulders, and that's something that I complain about in a lot of sport bucket seats. So these seats are really nice. Active bolstering or adaptive bolstering, so it'll pinch or let off depending on what mode you're in. Really, really nice. The only thing that I don't like about these seats is the fact that you have heated seats, you have a heated steering wheel, and you don't have cooled seats. Again, in something nearing $100,000. So that's a little bit of a bummer. But then when we start to talk about the rear seats, again, they feel very special. A lot of the green trimming and the Alcantara and the, you know, all of the stitching and everything that continues back there. But they're pretty small. Again, this is, I think in terms of rear seat space, it goes GLC, then X3, then maybe this, and then Stelvio might be kind of similar. So it's not a huge amount of back seat. It's fine, it's reasonable. You know, I fit my dad back there. He's 6'1". He didn't love it, but you know, he could fit back there while we were, you know, bopping around town. So it's fine, it's usable, but it's not something that you probably want to drive cross country in if you're over 6 foot. Now, in terms of the trunk, it's kind of a similar story there. It's you know, it's an SUV, it's practical, but it's not the biggest trunk in the segment. But again, still a very usable package. I think ultimately from an interior perspective, I really do think special is the proper word to describe this cabin, and it does feel that way. It's missing a couple, you know, more modern and more progressive features, but I think with the incoming generation in 24, they'll remedy a lot of that stuff. So I think with that, it's a good time to get into final thoughts. So the Porsche Macan GTS. I was genuinely and sincerely impressed with this car. There aren't a lot of cars, much less compact SUVs on sale today, that feel as sharp as this does. It's impossibly sharp behind the wheel, it's shockingly comfortable when you want it to be, and while it's smaller than a lot of the competitors we've mentioned, it's still a very practical package. The question then is, at an as-tested price of $96,260, is it worth the money? I'd like to think if I had that kind of money, I'd love to have a Macan GTS in my garage. Thanks so much for watching, we'll see you in the next one.